Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I am Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am very excited for the beginning of our Advancing Outcomes with Asset Leadership series. This month, all the ALN Thursdays at 3 will be a special hour-long session on this topic. And so let's get underway. Just want to thank our patron members, Definitive Logic, Onuma System, ABS Quality Evaluations, and Jacobs, as well as our other organizational members for their continued support makes programming like this possible. So thank you again to all of them, and especially Definitive Logic for Jack Dempsey's participation here today. And with that, I will bring on Mike Bordenero, Executive Director for the ALN. And I think, Mike, take us away.
Well, first, I got to say thank you to Nick. He emphasized the specialness of this month by creating that video lead-in that shows the diversity and breadth of people that we get to speak with us in a casual manner on Thursdays at 3. And thank you to all of you who listen to the podcast or watch the videos on YouTube. We get more and more response from high-level people saying that they're doing that. So we really appreciate that. And we really do appreciate the support of our patron members and our organizational members. And our patron member, Definitive Logic, I think is important, helped shape this discussion for this month. It occurred to me that leaders are people who sign policy, and that we should have a policy month and talk about asset management policy. And I talked with Jack Dempsey and he said, whoa, leaders are interested in outcomes. Policy is one of the things that help them get to the outcomes they want to have. What we should be talking about is advancing outcomes with asset leadership. So what we're going to be doing is further defining the difference between asset leadership and asset management. Simply said, asset leadership are the people who say we are going to start using new tools and processes and this structured approach to asset management that's taking off all over the world to change the way we manage our assets. So the leadership is that decision to invest time, money, research into an improved and advanced process. And this month, we're going to have different angles on how to look at it. Today is great. We've got all ALN board members, and they are all involved in writing standards. They're taking a leadership in that way also. And then next week, we'll be talking with our friends from Canada who are a little bit more advanced in their asset management than we in the US. And they have legislation that is another act of leadership. And then we're going to be having the folks from Portland, Oregon talk about how they wrote the asset management policy for the city of Portland, Oregon. I'm looking forward to that also. And then we're going to do something a little different. We want to engage you. We want you to participate. So the Thursday before Christmas, please say you want to speak. We're going to have an open forum Christmas party talking about the issues that have come up. And then the Thursday before New Year's, we're going to have a panel of people talking about what has been learned from this month of discussions. And Jack Dempsey had a great idea that we create a paper out of the conversations, the ideas, any chat exchanges, any email exchanges that happen because of this discussion. We're going to put into a document that reports on what we've learned about advancing outcomes with asset leadership. So without further ado, we're going to start with Jack Dempsey, who's going to give a 10-minute talk. We're going to then follow that up with Jim Dieter. And Jack Kelly gets the cleanup spot, but very interested and excited to hear from you, Jack Dempsey.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike. And it's always a pleasure to be here with the Asset Leadership Network. And I think your startup was kind of right on point. We talk about asset management a lot, and leadership is a big part of the thought process. But usually we jump ahead, getting into the details. So I think these forums are excellent places to kind of air some ideas, hear about what different people are thinking, and ultimately, from the ALN standpoint, is get some feedback from people who are using this information. I want to hear more from you and get your insights on what kind of content is important. In prepping for this conversation, I was kind of thinking about, okay, what would be of interest? And one of the things I went to was Simon Snigget. I think many of you know him. He's got the Golden Circle, the Why, How, What conversation. And an element of that is most people know what they do and how they do it. And sometimes we forget about the why we do things, which is really a big part of what gets us all excited. So I thought, well, maybe that's a good frame of reference to think about in terms of this conversation today. So the why we do asset management is it's all about outcomes, as Mike kind of highlighted. Asset management is a management discipline. It's complicated, has lots of details, involves technical language. But ultimately, the reason why asset management here today, in terms of kind of a discipline, is it's about outcomes. Executives got jobs to do. They want to get things done. They need confidence that their organization is going to work that way. Managers and practitioners, likewise, need to understand what's needed. They need to get things done, and they don't want to deal with headaches. So it's about why, getting to the outcome. And so that's basically the big underscore for asset management. How asset management does that, and this was kind of a light bulb moment for me as I was getting used to the standards and learning about the standards. It's not about assets. It's about value, or more specifically, the value created by assets. It sounds simple, but actually that statement for me is probably the most profound statement in the entire body of the ISO 55000 standards. When I read it a couple of times, I just read it, kept on going to the next thing. But as I kept on coming back and looking at that, it started kind of making sense to me that it's not about asset management in terms of managing the asset. It's really about the values created by assets. So I'm a civil engineer. I spent most of my time in a professional life as an asset manager, managing assets, solving problems, doing that kind of stuff. I love engineering. I was really excited about, construction management, design, facility maintenance, and stuff like that. And I was always interested in how come, like, the consumer that I'm helping out is not really all that interested in the stuff that I was doing. So early in my career was kind of a mystery I had to solve. And asset management really kind of helped me do that. It's about understanding that what is important to them is this facility is there operating and they can get their job done, but they're interested in getting their job done, not necessarily my job. That's my job. So the why is it's all about outcomes. The how is it's focusing on value. So what do you do in terms of asset management is important, and that's where a lot of the work is. So from a manager, basically you want to get the job done, and you want to make sure that what you're communicating is clear to the people who need to respond to your instructions or your direction. And likewise, as a manager, you have bosses that you have to make sure that you understand what their needs and requirements are. So the asset management structure is about understanding how to communicate more or less those objectives, those priorities, particularly how is value defined and moving back and forth. As a practitioner, you don't want headaches. You want to get the job done and know that you're doing a good job. As an owner, you just want to make sure things are working. And as a consumer or kind of a participant in this process, you want to have some appreciation that, wow, that's helping things out. I like what's going on over there. That's the why, how, what. The big picture, to get back to the theme of what Mike Bornario brought up, was it's not really all about asset management. It's about asset leadership and the ability to understand that organizations have needs, they have assets, those assets have needs, and to understand how that's being coordinated. Right now, we're all aware of and can appreciate and have lots of examples of how stovepipe activities just limit, or frustrate the ability to make good decisions or do good work. So asset leadership, in terms of why that's important, and I think a big important conversation for today, is it's about understanding that asset management system, those activities and all those professionals trying to get the work done, make things happen. It's about changing. It's about having the courage in some cases to go out and try something new. It's about learning about new information. It's about coming to forums like this and saying, maybe there's more to this story than I know and understand. Leadership happens at, of course, multiple different levels, but ultimately it's about learning how all this information gets put together, and also understanding and learning how organizations really need to figure out, can I do more? Is there more that I can do? Can I lower risk? Can I increase costs? All that kind of stuff is good management stuff. But the leadership aspect is taking that first step. So I think that's a good, I guess, way to kind of frame today's conversation. It certainly gives some insights on my view of how asset management is important, and in some respects provides a why, how, what answer.
Before we move on to Jim Dieter, Jack, can you give us an example of asset leadership from your long career? And I always have to say, thank you for introducing me to the Asset Leadership Network. We've known each other for a long time, and you knew I'd be very interested in this, and I am.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And probably the first really hot galvanize time I got really learning about asset management. I was in the Coast Guard. I was an officer, civil engineer. Mid-career, I got assigned to headquarters, which for somebody working in the field isn't really the exciting tour you want to take mid-career. At that time, the Coast Guard, as any organization, was going through challenges. Changes were happening in the environment. The budget was always under pressure. Trying to figure out how technology applies and how it all kind of works. At the time, we had a leader, Admiral ALN, who's been a recent participant here at the ALN and otherwise, who basically said, we need to think about this differently, solve the problem differently. And he developed an initiative that I became involved in. It's called the Shore Facilities Capital Asset Management Program. At the beginning, it was hard to understand how that was making a difference, because we talked about value and kind of soft things, whereas engineers like to talk about life cycle and investment strategies. But the focus that he took, and it really in many ways changed the course of my professional journey, was it's really, you got to focus on the culture, on the people. They have to understand that what is happening here is advantageous, helping them out. And that means, kind of living that process, that journey with them. So that was an experience I had midway through my career in the Coast Guard that really opened my eyes to say there's something else going on. I'll just fast forward a little bit. Today, I'm involved with some others here on the call, developing the ISO standards, updating those standards. And one aspect that I'm really happy to see happening in those conversations is there's a conversation, it's an international conversation on what are the asset management principles in asset management. Are there principles? Can we define those principles? How do they apply? Lots of kind of interesting twists and turns. But I think the conversation of principles is basically a leadership kind of conversation. It's talking about, whereas the standards, for example, and some of you are familiar with those, talk about how to do something right. Principles talk about doing the right things. Principles help you look around the corners or something more that we need to do. Sustainability, for example, is a big element of our contributions on we're using these assets, but what happens with them. The ability for continuity planning is a big part of the asset management story and how we're doing that. So principles is kind of like, I think, a modern version of taking standards and requirements and methods and policies, telling this is what you got to do. Principles is a way that helps us understand and makes us ask the question, what should I be doing? And am I doing the right things that overall generate value?
Thank you very much. And I've got to share one of my favorite leadership stories with Admiral Allen. Kimono Onuma, president of Onuma Inc., which is an ALN patron member, was working with Jack Dempsey on that program that he mentioned. And he wasn't getting any involvement. He had a contract with the Coast Guard, but no one was really asking him for his advanced visualization of data processes. And then Admiral Allen had a meeting with the engineering department and said, I need to improve my outcomes. And if the engineering department as it is cannot help me improve my outcomes, I will fire all 600 engineers and I will outsource this to anyone in the world who will help me achieve my outcomes. And all of a sudden, Kimon said his phone started ringing off the hook. People wanted to talk with him about the ways they could help achieve Admiral Allen's outcomes. That's establishing culture. So
It's sobering too, but it is, yeah, exactly. It was, and that's effectively true.
Yeah, it's sobering, and that's what all of this is. You know, I think we have been confronted with the sobering facts of what's happening to our world, and perhaps asset leadership can drive the asset management needed to help. And Jim Dieter is next up. Hi, Jim.
Hi, Mike. How are you today?
I'm excited.
That's good.
Well, I'll let you take your 10 minutes and come back at the end of your talk.
Well, yeah, I got to pick up on Jack Dempsey as well then, because when he told me in the past that story, he ended with something that I think is very relevant to the discussion about outcomes. You know, we talk about asset management, asset leadership, you know, it's kind of intellectual concepts. And we talk about, can certainly get into talking about assets and managing the assets, you know, very, you know, sort of a third party kind of way of looking at it. But Jack said what he learned in the Coast Guard was that it's great to have all those Coast Guard cutters and it's great to have all those shore facilities, but the outcome isn't just a concept. It's pulling a child from the water in a flood. And I've just used that image all the time to help me focus on what's really important. You know, whatever your organization is, what is it you're really doing? And how are your assets supporting what you're doing? And what assets should you have to support what you're doing? If we're running the DC Metro, it's great to talk about trains being on time and you know, avoiding accidents, all really important. But the outcomes, the big value that's provided is all those people getting to work every day, all those people getting to sporting events, all those people getting to wherever it is they want to go. You know, that's the outcome. That's the purpose of this system. And in the large view, you know, that of course is why that, you know, organization exists entirely. Now, not all organizations are so asset centric, which I like to use asset centric rather than asset intensive, because I think it's a more accurate term. But even organizations, lots of different assets that provides lots of different outcomes. Say a city, started to work at Jacobs through work with the city of St. Petersburg. And they're taking a large view of the assets that they have and getting everybody together to really have a joined up look of how they're doing asset management. It's not that they haven't been doing asset management very well, but they haven't been doing it in a structured and a coordinated way. You know, again, to tie back to earlier comments, is it's about the coordinated activities of an organization, you know, not the coordinated assets of an organization. So that value and outcomes. And that brings me back to the policy piece that, Mike talked about. I've written policies and had to live by policies, as we all have in organizations. And I didn't always have a good opinion of them. And I didn't really understand them the way I think I do now, which is, the policies are really the way for organizational leaders to institutionalize their principles, their processes within their organization. So an asset management policy, starts to work in that direction and will probably expand over time as more things are understood and more processes can be detailed, etc. But policies and then the procedures, get us to that point. I've also started to think about leadership in a little bit of a different way. And of course, there's, all models are wrong, some are useful, as Tony McGrail has said, and I have quoted many times. But so there's a part of leadership well, let's write the policy. Let's, how are we going to achieve those outcomes? Very linear kind of a process. And that's hugely important, as develops culture, etc. But there's also a portion of leadership that's dealing with the unknowns. What's going to happen tomorrow that you hadn't anticipated? Back to the city example, if St. Petersburg had been hit by a hurricane instead of, the next towns down the coast, it's a very different situation to have to deal with. So, being able to anticipate or react to, if necessary, unexpected and unknown events, and to look in a positive way for things that can be done in an organization. So having a structured approach to asset management, to try to tie those pieces together, a structured approach to asset management allows you to have that policy and procedures that help you point the organization towards achieving the objectives and mission of the organization, that plays out in the lives of people and other organizations, depending on, what your product of your organization is. I think it's important for us to really think about those outcomes, not just in terms of words on a PowerPoint slide. I'm starting to think outcomes should always be visuals. The visual of pulling a child from the water, or someone getting off the metro so that they can go to work, or go to a Nats game, like I often take the metro to do here in DC. It's important, and the assets that we're involved in managing, all of us, and providing leadership, it's the stage on which we live our lives. And there's trillions of dollars of assets around all of us that we're involved with every day. How's that, Mike? Is that good?
That was good, but I'm going to ask you the leadership question also, but I'm going to ask it a little different. Can you tell us a story of sports asset leadership that has resonated with you?
Oh, sure. It's an interesting one. So I'm a baseball fan, although you can pick about just about any team. So I'm a Nationals fan. I have been for years. And we've actually tried for several years to get Mike Rizzo, their general manager, or someone in his office to speak at one of our events about asset management. Of course, we probably would have to tell them, that what we think what they're doing in asset management, because they probably don't think of it that way. But managing the contracts are assets. To us, of course, people aren't assets. People are kind of the point of things. But those player contracts are assets, and the Nationals used, all the techniques available to them to assemble assets that led them to winning a World Series. Now people are greatly disappointed because, they've been bad for a couple of years because their assets aged out and they traded assets for younger assets, or those contracts, let's say. But they have another whole approach that they're working on now to assemble the assets. Of course, not just in terms of player contracts, but in terms of technology, in terms of coaching, and lots of other aspects. So, yeah, it's a good one.
Okay. Well, we'll have you back for the discussion period. We'll bring on Jack Kelly. And I'm just going to come out and say it, that Jack Kelly is a leader himself. While he was at the Office of Management and Budget, he established a program that saved the US federal government $1 billion in travel ticket costs a year. And it's still going on. And he helped establish, basically single-handedly, the GSA office. Tell me the proper name of it, Jack. I always say it wrong.
Office of Government-Wide Policy.
Government-wide policy. You would think that a large organization would have had an Office of Government-Wide Policy, but it didn't happen until Jack Kelly led the way to that. So, saved you to start the discussion. He's got some pretty exciting stuff to say. Take it away, Jack.
I don't know, Phil. Everybody will make a judgment about that when I'm done. So one of the things that Mike and Jim know about me is I do enjoy talking. And so I was told, make sure that you get 3 points across in your conversation so that you don't just ramble on forever. So I thought about that and I thought, okay, thinking about leadership, I have 3 points I want to make about leadership. The first is that anyone can be a leader regardless of what level you work at in an organization. It's not just the bosses that can be leaders. It's anybody that can be a leader. Secondly, leaders use the authority that's available to them to get things done. In other words, to achieve outcomes. They're not, you have to work within the tools and the authorities you have, but leaders take those authorities and they get things done. And finally, leaders lead teams. They don't accomplish things on their own. And it's all about, leadership is engaging a team in accomplishing something. And those are my 3 takeaway thoughts that I'd like at least get out there before I start rambling on. Most of the conversations that I've been part of that deal with leadership are leadership within an organization. And as both Jack and Jim mentioned, it's leadership that creates the culture that helps the organization mobilize itself in a constructive way across all of the different stovepipes to accomplish the desired outcomes of that organization. And it really is cultural leadership. That's what it's all about. It's getting people to feel comfortable with coming forward with new ideas, with trying things out that have never been done, with looking around the corner and trying to anticipate things that haven't happened yet. All of those are qualities that leadership needs to bring to organizations. The challenge that I'm facing right now, one of the working groups that I'm working on within the ISO structure, the Working Group 7, which is creating a new kind of asset. It's not really a standard, it's a set of guidance. And unlike the other guidance documents within the ISO TC 251, the asset management series, this one's looking not at an individual organization on how the organization should manage its assets, but it's taking the leadership idea up a level to a whole country. In other words, how can the organizations within a country mobilize themselves to adopt asset management? And it's kind of a novel challenge because you're not trying to get a single organization to behave a particular way. What you're trying to do is convince a lot of organizations to behave in a particular way. One of the foundational ideas that's part of the asset management series of standards is that organizations exist within a broader context. In other words, a set of conditions that affect what the organizations can do or direct them to do certain things. Like, so you may have regulations that you have to respond to that cause you to behave in ways that you otherwise wouldn't have behaved. You may have laws that do the same thing. And so the organizations that create those external conditions in the ISO 55000 world are considered stakeholders. So these stakeholders create the conditions within which the organization operates. Well, when you back away from it, looking at a single organization, and you take a very top-down look at all the organizations in a country, you see that a lot of the organizations that are stakeholders for specific organizations are common to a lot of organizations. They could be, whether they're government agencies, regulatory agencies, whether they're lenders, whether they're insurers. These are other entities that affect the behavior of the organizations that are managing their assets. So the question is, from a leadership perspective, how do you bring leadership into that mix of organizations? How do you actually engage them in a way that it's going to lead to the outcome? And by the way, one of the things that we have realized is that public policies are the most powerful way to influence behaviors in pretty much any country. So how do you engage all of those different players in a way that positively impacts the public policy making process, so that process supports asset management? And that's the challenge that we're facing in this working group. And so the question is, when you've got a whole cluster of organizations, where does leadership come in, and who's going to provide it? Well, what I've concluded is, as far as asset management goes, within any given country, there are two likely candidates who can play that leadership role. The first are what we call national mirror committees. And national mirror committees are basically, it's like the US TAG is the National Mirror Committee for Asset Management in the US. That's one. The second one is you've got asset management advocacy groups. For example, the Asset Leadership Network is an asset management advocacy group. And actually, I think we, the ALN, has been playing a leadership role even before I even knew what we were trying to do. And that is, several years ago, some of you who've been following us for a while know that we started developing something called the National Asset Leadership Strategy, the NALS. And we got a certain, we got down the road on that path a ways, and we're still on that road. But now that I've got this new role with this working group, trying to develop an approach to creating this environment for asset management, a positive environment, or what we call an enabling environment for asset management, I realized that NALS actually might serve in the role of what we in the asset management world call a strategic asset management plan. It may be a good vehicle to coordinate all the different key players, these participants in the enabling environment for asset management, to coordinate them in a way that we achieve the desired outcome, which is to obtain public policies that support asset management. So that's the path that we're on. It's a different way of thinking about leadership, but I think it's the way that we need to think about leadership to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish for the nation. And the result for the nation is for the nation to be able to achieve various national goals that in the case of the US are not well articulated yet. I mean, clean water is one, clean air is another one, safe transportation, modes or others. But other countries, and I'm thinking Australia, my favorite asset management, shining light in the world, they actually have a national infrastructure plan for the nation, and two of their largest states have state infrastructure plans. And putting together those plans requires a high degree of leadership and a high degree of engagement with the political processes in the country and in those states. So that's just huge, and they really they're teaching us a lot of lessons that we are still, trying to understand and apply in this country. But I think that's all I have to say right now, and I look forward to having a conversation.
Yeah, before we go full on, I do just want to talk with you a little bit and give you a leading question. So after a national asset leadership strategy is established, what do you see as that next step?
Well, so it's execution. I mean, having a strategy is like having a policy. It's a great first step. It gives you an idea of what you're trying to do, but then you got to actually do it. So to me, it's putting the strategy into action and actually executing.
And since this is such a big thing for a country, can you talk about the sector idea?
Yeah, so in this country, when we started thinking about how to influence the political process, and the first level that we think of doing that is the congressional level, because that's the national, public policy body that we have in this country. And if you think about how the Congress is organized, it's organized in committees and subcommittees, and those groups are organized around sectors, basically. So you've got a transportation infrastructure committee, you've got environmental committees that do the water sector. You've got, if you're trying to engage Congress, you have the most effective way is sector-based, because that's how they're organized and that's the way the laws are passed. There's no asset management committee.
Yeah, so sector by sector is a good way to approach that. And eventually, as we get the engine running, we will want to expand on our sectors. So with Grant Thornton, who is now Guidehouse, there was a healthcare sector that is started as a template for how other industries might want to talk about implementing the national asset leadership strategy in their sectors. So Jack Kelly brought it to a very big picture of leadership. So Jim and Jack Dempsey, you want to come in and make any comments about what anybody has been saying that you weren't able to?
Well, I'll offer the one thing that's hard to get your head around, and even just in the conversation we're having here, we talk about asset management all the time, is what can it do? This is a great idea. It's out there. People have been doing asset management and managing assets forever. Almost kind of like why is there something new here? It's sometimes hard to get your head around it. I mean, I learn something about asset management every day, and I do like the theme in terms of, well, let's kind of think about leadership, specifically asset leadership, and that's really trying to figure out, like, what haven't we figured out? Where do we need to go next? And when I think of, listen, what Jack was just saying about a national strategy for assets, I mean, immediately one of the things that comes to mind is semiconductor industry is an asset to the nation. I mean, I'm finishing up a study at the National Academies. We're focusing on the capital needs requirements of NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Testing, and or Technology. And that's a leading indicator. The CHIPS Act just identified major investments into NIST as a capability to advance US's position in terms of semiconductor development. There's a lot of testing. NIST is the organization that calibrates most of the most sophisticated systems that deal with the development of semiconductors. That's an asset. And when Jack was talking about this asset strategy, wouldn't it be nice if we could have a coherent strategy that would understand these types of implications, outsourcing technologies that now put the country at a point where we're maybe vulnerable, or supply chains, that kind of stuff. So asset management can solve those types of problems all the way down to a preventive maintenance strategy for a pump, and making sure that our PMs are done in an appropriate manner and are effectively achieving that. it's amazing to think that asset management is able to solve both of those problems using effectively the same tools. It's just remarkable in that way.
So you talked about the getting your mind around it and why this is happening now. And I'm just going to throw in my 2 cents here. We went from the Stone Age to the Iron Age over tens of thousands of years, but we're going basically from the Industrial Age to the Information Age in our lifetime. And the tools and processes that have exploded out of this Information Age have enabled standards, best practices across countries in a better way than they have previously. So we've got more consensus about important ideas at the association level, at the professional level, not at the political level. And now we've got these standards and we've got tools and processes to implement them, and they are changing every day. You can constantly be improving whatever tools and processes you use. So it is kind of overwhelming, which is why I liked joining the Asset Leadership Network. So Jim, what's the role of leaders helping them deal with what Jack Dempsey pointed out is like an overwhelmingness?
Yeah, so exciting to think about that we are really, well, asset management has been around forever. Asset leadership and a structured approach to asset management, we're really all inventing that right now. You know, all of us here have been involved in developing standards, as have, people from around the world, and that opportunity to learn from people around the world is amazing. But when we started the ALN, the idea was to move the ball forward. So we've got a lot of hubris. How many people, organizations, relatively small, relatively new, say, well, we're going to write a national asset leadership strategy draft for people to consider. Jack Dempsey helped us a few years ago, helped us write a draft executive order, which was too bad it didn't get put into place then. It was excellent. But I think it says something about the ALN, but to John Wyatt's questions about what to teach in the chat, what to teach about leadership. I think it's that thinking big is a big part of it. Having experience, having broad knowledge, thinking big, and be willing to think out of the box. I got to tell you, it's stunning to me how hard it is for people to change the way they think about things. We have so many people in our profession, and they're great people doing great stuff, but they've seen it one way, and of course I've been there myself, so I'm not pointing at anybody. When I got involved in ISO standards, I thought, I know what asset management is, but I realized I had blinders on, and the blinders kept getting pulled away as I understood what asset management was. And I can't tell you how many times that happened, but it's that openness to what's possible, and to question things in a positive, effective way. And I got to say, a big part of the ALN, of course, is we have an altruistic, bent of just, we're trying to, make the world a better place. And, I'd say this little place, but I don't want to play it down. I mean, we're talking about trillions of dollars just in this country, trillions of dollars worth of assets. And we have all of us are already impacting that trillions of dollars worth of assets. And the value, of course, back to my earlier point, that's derived from those assets by, everything that happens in this country happens with the involvement and because of assets.
So Jack Kelly, you went big, like Jim Dieter is saying that we should do. So you're trying to help leaders in countries understand the steps that they can take to get the ball rolling, to actually establish a country-wide version of a culture of asset management through their leadership. What types of information do you think are important to include in that standard about what leaders need to be thinking and doing?
Well, before I answer that, if in fact I do answer, I'm going to talk about what I want to talk about. So one of the things you have to understand about leadership is the requirements of leadership vary dramatically depending on the circumstances of the organization in which those leaders operate. So for example, if you're a leader in the city of Flint, Michigan, when you just realized that nobody can drink the water, the challenges you face as a leader in Flint, Michigan to try to turn that around are very different from the challenges that a leader faces in a city that's got everything pretty well underway and is at a different place in its capabilities. So, and sometimes the leadership skills that are essential to work through a crisis are very different from the leadership skills, maybe even antithetical to the leadership skills that have to be present in an organization that's much more mature, much more better organized, and moving in a different way, because they're just different there are different circumstances, there are different emotions involved, there are different skill sets involved. So leaders have to be able to thrive in the environment that they find themselves in for the benefit of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
But so going back to your question now, what we've done, and we haven't got it all figured out yet. One of the things that we've done that I think is helpful is we've defined what we call the participants in the enabling environment. In other words, these are ways to characterize the kinds of organizations that people in asset owning organizations look to as stakeholders. So we're talking about lenders, we're talking about insurers, we're talking about the political system, the regulators, and so forth. And so what we've done is we've got a little annex in our draft standard, or draft, I hate to call it a standard, a document that talks about what are the behaviors of different kinds of participants that enable asset management. So for example, if you're talking about lenders, one of the kinds of behaviors that lenders could manifest to enable asset management is to give favorable loan rates to organizations that have demonstrated asset management competence. We're going to give you a break because our risk of losing money from our loan to you is much lower than it would be if we loan money to an organization that didn't do its job as well. Similarly, insurers, same thing. So what we have done, it's an early draft, and I'm hoping it'll be improved as more people look at it. But it's like once we can be clear in our own minds about the behaviors that enable asset management, depending on who you are, what kind of organization you are, then that creates an opportunity not only for those organizations to see themselves and what they can do to enable asset management. We also have another related table that says what are the benefits to these participants of adopting asset management or supporting asset management, so they can see what the benefits are and they can see the kinds of behaviors that they need to manifest if they want to achieve those benefits. And the other thing, we're still trying to figure this stuff out, but if we get it well, if we do a good job, my goal is that people who read this document will come away saying, well, I can see where I am in this whole environment, and I can see what I can do to enable asset management, and I can see the benefits from doing that. So there will be hopefully some self-motivation that will be created by the document. But in addition, the document also talks about how you can connect more effectively with the policymaking process. And one of the things that I'm convinced of, and I haven't gotten far enough down the path of making it work, but what I'm convinced of is that the organizations that have the greatest ability to impact the policymaking process in our country are probably professional associations that advocate asset management and have good lobbying organizations, because they're the ones that have, they see it in their own interest and the interest of their members to be able to affect public policy that affects their members.
As a shout out to our friends at the American Society of Civil Engineers who have done a great job in bringing attention to infrastructure and have done what you just said about the infrastructure bill.
Yeah. So again, we're still figuring it out. We're on. I'm excited about the path that we're on, but it's a path, and we're not quite at the destination.
No, but you're leading it, and thank you for those efforts. And before I ask Jack Dempsey a question, Jack Kelly, your first comment about there's leaders at many levels reminded me that we are almost about to publish our first paper with the Institute of Asset Management on leadership. And in that, we say that there are many levels of leadership, and we talk about the behaviors that are needed at those. So we're looking forward to getting that out end of this year and start pushing and promoting it at the beginning of next year. So we're very happy because that's our first formal activity with the writing activity with the Institute of Asset Management. So Jack Dempsey, I'm going to put a twist on John Wyatt's question and say he's asking about education for asset management. Well, in the military, you were in the Coast Guard, there's enlisted training and there's officers training. There's different type of training for different types. So I equate the officer training to asset leadership training. And then he's also talking about DOD spending the bulk of money and adoption of ISO 55000. If you can talk about how your experience with military training and the difference between enlisted training and officer training might play into this discussion, and maybe address the idea of how the discipline of what is done with the DOD and the volume that's done with the DOD, how can that help on the civilian side also?
Yeah, first thing, I'll just reset that question. You can't really distinguish between the officer and enlisted, training in relationship to asset leadership. I mean, the one thing that I think makes the American military successful as a fighting force is it promotes and it actually requires leadership at every single level. Even if you're an E1 in boot camp, you're learning leadership skills there. And another advantage of the military training in that environment is it's results oriented. You have to get things done. You have to deliver activity. So asset management in a big way is inherent to the thought process and even the culture of the military. And I grew up, kind of did my time in the Coast Guard. Today I work across DOD, do a lot of work in the Air Force and Army. And those same elements are there. Kind of the raw materials are there, and they're being incorporated. They're being rolled into the schoolhouses and learning that. Jim Dieter just made a point, and it kind of highlights something. It's amazing what we don't know, and sometimes when we discover something, it's like, how can this happen? Why is this still the case? I'll give a case in point. One of the other activities I'm working on is I'm a member of a committee with National Academies. We're writing a report evaluating federal policy related to facility asset management. And we have a number of key findings in that. The report should be released here shortly. One of them, and it's kind of remarkable, and I don't think most people really believed it when it's there, and we spent a lot of time evaluating every angle on this problem, is the federal government, if you follow the policy, the rules, the regulations, and the laws, you can't do effective asset management. For example, for facilities, there's no balance sheet that tells you how much money you actually spent on your facilities. In fact, if you use the accounting structure that the federal government mandates, it makes it impossible to come up with a balance sheet. So if you're going to do like a return on investment or cost benefit analysis, there's no information if you rely on just the systems that the government mandates. It focuses on kind of like the left brain, right brain, where one side is focused on project program management, the appropriations of funding, ensuring that it's going to be funded in the correct way. The CFO Act is something that we're all very familiar with. If you apply the CFO Act and you pass the audit, all that says is that you spent the money in the authorized appropriation in accordance with law. That's it. It does nothing, absolutely nothing. This will be a finding, and it's part of a recommendation in this report that's about to come out. It does nothing to put an agency in a position to do asset management, to do the trade-offs. Do I spend more money on maintenance, or do I do capital investments? Do I tear down buildings and reduce footprint, or do I renovate buildings? What do I do about other factors? So one of the findings we have in that report, and I think it kind of speaks to this leadership thing, and it does in some respect address, I think some glaring federal problems, is educators introducing this capability, this understanding is important. It has to start somewhere. It has to start with leaders. Leaders are even educators who are trying to introduce these principles, introduce these understandings. And so that way, generations ahead of us can grow and learn this. But I think Jim was exactly right. As much as we've been managing assets forever, we really are on the cutting edge and at a very dynamic time learning about asset leadership. And I think that's something that we can all think about and reflect on. And we're all part of that answer. So it's kind of an exciting future here. A lot of these problems have not been solved. And it's going to be pretty exciting the next few years to see how they do get solved as we face ever increasing problems and lack of funding and resources. We somehow have to figure out an answer. So it's pretty exciting times, really, when you think about the future of asset management and specifically asset leadership.
Thank you. Jim Dieter, I'd like to let you have the final word before we have Nick come in and help us wrap up.
Oh, yeah, well, I could easily go off on talking about Peter Duffy and his value at risk model, but just briefly, he's a risk management guy. And the concept is there's value preservation and there's value creation. So what we think of as managing assets, or refer to it, so the asset-centric part tends to be that value preservation. It's about depreciation. It's about compliance. It's about keeping things running. Hugely important. Hugely important. But it's largely a management activity where the value creation is where leadership comes from. How else can we use the assets we have to create additional value for our organization and our clients and our customers? How can we, avoid things that decrease that, and how can we encourage things that increase it? And I think that's the exciting part to me about asset leadership, is the possibilities for organizations and leaders to make a difference in their part of the world.
Well, thank you for that. And that's a perfect lead in. Peter Duffy from Ireland has agreed to be a guest on ALN Thursday at 3 in January to talk about the program. And he's going to give his presentation and have a discussion on the chart that Jim said that distinguishes between value maintenance and value creation. So it's a great month, December, but we're already planning great things in January in 2023. So please stick around. And actually, if anybody is interested in becoming a panelist after we close out and continuing this discussion, I'm willing to stick around. I don't need any of the other panelists to stick around. But like Jack Dempsey said, let's collect this information and create a document out of it. So Michael Hardy, if you have time, John Wyatt, would love to get some ideas from you too, if you've got time. And anybody else who's on can join. So Nick.
Yeah, well, that's a good call to action, Mike. And if you're interested, you can send me a direct chat and I can promote you to a panelist or allow you to speak to the group. Before we get going with that, just want to make sure we thank our esteemed panelists for today, as well as our patron members and other organizational members who help make programming like this possible. And especially wanted to highlight Definitive Logic for Jack Dempsey's participation here today and for their continuing support. And with that, we're in overtime, but maybe just close for people who are done.
Yeah, so people are done. If you're sticking around, we're just going to start making you panelists. So I see John Wyatt is still around. So I am going to promote to panelists. We've got Mark Knight. He's sticking around. Oh, yep, there he is.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, John. Does your camera turn on?
Yeah, I look like hell today. I'm doing grades, but
Okay.
okay.
How's that different than the rest of us?
Okay, let me see. Okay, I look like hell. Okay, but I got my dog rescue sweatshirt on for Jim. Okay. Let me rephrase my question, Mike. What I was really asking is this: out here, especially in California, and from what I'm reading, and Jack, this is really a good question for you. And Jack, good to see you again. Thank you. Okay. Since you saw me last time, I survived the heart surgery. So that's why everything got muddled up. I see a big switch on budgets from money the DoD used to get potentially now to being generated for the infrastructure. That to me, in my opinion, would seem to foster an environment that would lend itself more to adoption of ISO standards, because you got a lot more different entities, especially money that's going to come in the way of grants from the Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, et cetera, to state agencies, et cetera, local governments possibly too, who are going to be maybe more attuned to the realities of what asset management is. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because I think that's important to me as an educator. Because right now I'm redoing my contract management program from strictly more of a DoD-based system to a general FAR-based system, because I think that's where the future lies. And I just, my question is, you think we're on the right track? Because I do think leadership in asset management envisions working with educators to help develop the next generation of asset managers. I think everybody's probably on board with that statement. And that being said, I'd love to have, and I don't know Mark, hi Mark, and Anderson, hi. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because I'm trying to develop some ideas on maybe a core curriculum or something like that, envisioning asset management that Mike and I have been talking about.
So you want me to talk first?
Of course.
So with respect to the federal government, the biggest problem that in my view, that we have in the federal government is the lack of leadership at the OMB level to address asset management. I mean, it's just it's a sad state of affairs. I mean, I wish I were still there, knowing what I know now about asset management, but I'm gone, and it's frustrating because they just don't seem to get it. And so the situation right now in the federal government, you may or may not know this, is there have been a number of federal agencies that have adopted or begun adopting asset management on their own because it makes sense to them. They haven't been told to do it. It makes sense to them. They see benefits in doing it. And so some agencies have actually made pretty impressive progress, typically at a level below the agency headquarters level. But people are starting to hear more about it. They're starting to hear the success stories. One of the things the ALN, I think, does a really good job of is showcasing these success stories at our conferences and on our webinars like this one, to let people know that, State Department is doing some cool things. NASA is doing some cool things. Bureau of Reclamation is doing some cool things. Western Area Power Administration is basically adopted ISO 55000 and that's been adopted for several years now. And they have wonderful stories to tell. If you go to their websites, they'll give you like the success stories that they have that they're able to tell because they've implemented asset management. And so it's been sort of a bottom up evolution in the direction of asset management just because it makes so much sense to those agencies. But in terms of leadership from the top, like at OMB, nada. It's just it's kind of a desert there as far as I can tell. And
Mark
as far as
Knight-
the FAR
oh,
is
sorry.
concerned, when I've retired from OMB, my last 5 years were with the OFPP, the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. So I know people there who are the FAR experts, and I may be chatting with some of them soon.
Well,
Very
Jack,
good.
you're the expert, but you're confirming what my suspicion was, and I appreciate that. That I think the more of this money flows down, I'm going to say, into the trenches. Those are the people that really appreciate what value is because they
Yeah.
have to. Their jobs depend on it. And so it may be more of a trickle up situation. But again, as an educator, students are going to go in entry-level positions for the most part. So I'm trying to focus a broad-based, how do I say this? Broad-based government competency criteria for what an entry-level person with some academic training or classes in ISO and asset management broadly construed would have, and how that would be of benefit to them and getting hired. That's really what I'm asking in a very broad way, because quite frankly, I think that's where, and military training, whatever, that's kind of irrelevant in my opinion, because that's what DOD does and that's fine. But I'm a state institution, state recognized state university, AACSB accredited. So we serve all clients. We serve federal, state, local, etc. And I'm on a panel right now at Cal Poly working with urban planning. And the urban planning part of this is going to involve the infrastructure bill. And I'm telling them about ISO.
Excellent.
And I was very honored that they selected me to be on it, because that's another college. And colleges can be, I'm being taped, I better shut up. Colleges can be a little bit territorial, okay? But they're not.
That's not a secret, John.
What?
Don't worry. That's
Okay.
not a secret.
Okay, but the key is that, are we on the right track? And Jack, anything you could send me with some of these agencies, I would greatly appreciate, because
Let's have a separate conversation, John, what you're involved in. You're being an excellent leader for looking into, what to train asset managers for, and in this panel. But we've got Mark Knight. He hadn't turned on his camera, but I see his microphone's off. So I want to give him a chance to talk too.
I don't actually have a camera button showing up on my screen mic, so I can't switch it on. I don't know why.
Everybody
Oh,
can imagine a good-looking English guy who's living in Boston now. Now you just turned off your microphone. You didn't turn on a camera. Oh, there you go. You got a camera and a microphone.
All right, there I am down there. Okay. All right. Well, I was actually just about to hit the leave button when you called me out earlier. So I was kind of interested in what John was just talking about, because the IAM is also looking at how to engage universities, and it's not something that I've really got too involved in because I'm wearing too many hats and don't have the time to devote to all the various different things. But one of the things I am involved in the US is knowledge development, which is one of the reasons we reached out to you and we worked on that paper together. But I think there's a huge opportunity here. I mean, to what all the panelists were talking about earlier. We've been managing assets for decades, centuries, but now there's a formal discipline evolved around that, we have better understanding as to what we're trying to do and how to do it, we can get better results. Leadership's a key part of that, but also bringing new people in is critical. So I think one of the things that the IM's looking at, and no reason ALN shouldn't be doing the same thing, and that's working with universities to have, industry experts come in. Like when you were at college, you have people come in and they give you industry feedback, what's going on in the real world. So there's a good opportunity for us to get involved as ALN doing that, educate students as to, the significance of asset management in today's world. It also gives them a chance to think about that as a career, but for us to then engage them in actually helping to develop some of the knowledge, maybe through sponsored projects or something like that. But it's going to be a heck of a lot easier if there's a structured curriculum, that one or more universities are using. So what that curriculum should look like is kind of that's where it gets a bit more challenging. I know there are people looking into that at the moment within the IAM.
So I'm so glad to hear that the IAM is looking at that. John Wyatt has agreed to be a co-chair of an ALN higher education board. And we've also got Peter Kohler from Australia. And in Australia, through the Asset Management Council, they do have curriculum. So we're not going to have to start from scratch. We'll be able to look at what they have. And then I realized there's going to be a distinction. And John, this is what I was talking about, officers training versus enlisted men training. And I'm glad Jack Dempsey said that there's leadership training in every step of the way. But there are definite courses on asset leadership that is different than the management of the assets. And so we'll be looking into that. Mark, I'll keep you abreast of how that develops. And before we lose Anderson Martin, I would love to have him make a comment. You don't need to turn on your camera if you don't want to, but since you've stuck around, I want to definitely give you the chance to say or comment. And maybe we just promoted him and he had already walked away and is in the other room. So I think we're talking amongst ourselves now. So yeah, so Mark, too bad the leadership paper isn't ready, because we could easily include that, but maybe you can join us for our pre-Christmas or pre-New Year's events that are going to be kind of more casual, and we can talk a little bit about that, get Mark DeClerc in, and maybe some other folks from IAM, and that could be a section of the conversation.
Yeah, I was on a call with Ursula earlier today, Mike, and she IM'd me on the call to say that it's with the whoever it is that does the the layout, getting so I think we were close last week when we were exchanging all those emails. We're closer this week.
Excellent. So, well, thank you for sticking around. This was an experiment to see how to run these open discussions. And John, you have any further comments?
I just want to tell Mark, I'm going to send you an email, okay? Because I think we should link up by email if that's a great.
I'll connect you as soon as we're over.
Okay, because I mean, one of the, just like jump back on that topic quickly, Mike, because
yeah.
So I was on a call with actually with somebody from a UK branch meeting that I decided to go attend. I'm actually based in Massachusetts, but and we were talking to the University of Bristol over there about some work they've been doing on climate emergency. But they're part of a group of 4 regional universities that kind of share resources and grants and work together with each other. So I don't know whether there are colleges doing similar things here, but I mean, that would be a really good way to launch a curriculum or something like this, rather than having to go around and sell it dozens of times. If you've got like a consortium of colleges, working together that could agree on that, I mean, that would be a real way to, good way to fast track this.
Part of the idea of the ALN Higher Education Asset Leadership Board is to create a free curriculum template that would allow universities and colleges to more quickly establish a program. And I guess that's what's available out of the Australia. But again, they're very, and it's very important to have the asset management part, but we want to make sure to also include this concept of asset leadership.
Yeah, and I think earlier on the call, it came up a couple of times about leadership at all levels. So, priming people coming straight into jobs out of college that they can be a leader no matter where they start is, I think that's a really key point.
Yeah, I like that.
So while I've got these smart people on this call, I want to toss something out that's been sort of interesting to me. When I first read the standard, and this is back just before I joined the ALN, back about 2015, I read it and I thought, wow, this is just a lot of good information. It's all common sense, but it's very comprehensive, and it was organized in a way that I had a hard time getting my head around it, because it's not organized. If I were writing a standard that just dealt with asset management, I would have written it differently. And in fact, that's one thing I love about the IAM 6-block model. That was the first time that it really came together in a way that helped me understand what the thing actually did. But here's what I've learned over time, and you guys who've been around this longer than I will have probably more insights. When you understand the management system standards, all of them, they're principally based on just good organizational management. It's what they call the blue text in the standards. It's the language that's common to all the management system standards. And so there was a question back in working group 4 when we started redoing 55,000. The question was, how do you make a distinction between asset management and the other management system standards? What makes asset management special? And so I thought about that, and what I came up with, I think I said it to some people, and no one, that people kind of gave me this blank look. So I'm going to see if I get blank looks from y'all. To me, what the difference is that so you do all this good management stuff, but at the end of the day, whether you're trying to achieve quality goals, whether you're trying to achieve environmental goals or safety goals, whatever these specific goals are, there's got to be something you do depending on the kind of business you're in, but in many businesses, you have to solve the problem fundamentally at the asset level. You have to have machines with higher tolerances. You have to have machines that are more reliable. You have to have maintenance programs that are more, you have to solve the problem that you're trying to solve at the asset level. And what asset management standard does is it links all these high level goals to what you need to do through your asset management plans to actually make sure the assets support those goals. Now, is that a reasonable way to think about things?
For me, it is. I got another way of looking at it as well, because when Mike and I and Mark de Klerk worked on this paper, and then we circulated it within the ALN and the IAM, and we were expecting a bit of pushback on both sides, and we just kind of, it's like a kind of damp sine wave. We get to the point where everybody's kind of equally comfortable with it, and we have something we can publish. But when I was pushing it around inside the IAM, looking for comments, one of the email chains had a really good one-liner in it, and I thought, pardon my French, but like, holy shit, that is awesome. I'm going to steal that line and I'm going to stick it in the paper. So I'm not sure if, I think I pointed it out to Mike when I put it in there, but it said, for a mature or in a mature organization, or something like this. Now I say I'm going to quote it, I'm messing it up, but in a mature organization, the line between asset management and organizational management disappears.
Right. Right, exactly.
So that came back to me when you were talking about what's the difference between asset management and other management standards. And I mean, I think you summed it up best. It's good kind of common sense, fundamental principles that have been codified.
Yeah, but to me, the difference, just to underscore it, is that asset management is what you have to do at the asset level to achieve your objectives. And it doesn't matter whether they're environmental objectives, if they're quality objectives. I don't understand. I've never seen I've never read any of the other management system standards. I'm too cheap to buy them. And so I'm looking forward to, Tom Smith has offered to do a course for the ALN that gives an overview of the management system standards and helps you understand all of them. And I'm dying to take that course because I need to understand all that other stuff.
Excellent. I'll put the pressure on him. I didn't understand that that was an offer from him. So that's great.
Yeah, sign me up for that one as well.
Yeah, I love the idea that the word standards come from the battle flags that were raised in the medieval wars. And if you saw that standard, people ran away because it was associated with some badass people. Or
It goes way earlier than medieval times. I mean, you have the Roman standards, you have, Macedonia. I don't know what the first example of a battle flag was, but it sure is way earlier than medieval times.
yeah, but it was a standard to scare the hell out of people.
Well,
It's like, if you saw that, don't fight that big red X or whatever
Well,
their standard was.
that was like a secondary thing. The primary thing was to organize your forces. So so the standard would be a rallying point for your troops. And if you could rally your troops and get them all where you needed them, then you had a chance to prevail on the battlefield.
So
And
when everything broke down and all hell has broken loose, you can still say, okay, if I go there, then I'll be in order.
Well, I'll be where I'm supposed to be.
Well, that's kind of what we're facing right now. So I don't think people, I'll try to figure out a way to make a connection between, the organization on a battlefield for success and the organization we need to do in the world for success these days, battling ourselves, basically.
Keep an eye out for some kind of ALN pennant on the wall behind you.
Yeah. Well, thanks
Well,
for
listen,
sticking
guys.
around, guys. I don't want to keep you longer, but I wanted to see what kind of good stuff will come out. And some good things were said. So we'll make a transcript of this, and in the document we create, some of you guys will be popping up with these extra overtime comments.
Thanks for Mike. Thanks for hosting this
Thanks.
extension, and nice
Yes.
talking to y'all. Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
John, I'll get you the letter you requested soon, okay? All right. Bye, everyone.